The blood on Katherine Preston's hands wasn't her own, and that terrified her more than anything else she had endured in the past 3 years of marriage. She stood in the kitchen of their modest house on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, staring at her husband sprawled unconscious on the floor, the cast iron skillet still trembling in her grip. She had finally fought back, and now there was no turning back. It was the spring of 1883, and Katherine was 24 years old, though she felt decades older. Her husband, Richard Preston, had been a charming businessman when they met, but the charm had dissolved like sugar in hot coffee once the wedding vows were spoken. The first blow had come 3 months after their wedding. The second came a week later. After that, Katherine lost count. Tonight had been different. Richard had come home drunk again, angrier than usual because of some business deal gone wrong. When he raised his hand to strike her, something inside Katherine snapped. She grabbed the nearest thing, the heavy skillet from the stove, and swung it with every ounce of strength desperation could provide. The sickening thud when it connected with his skull would haunt her for years to come. Katherine dropped the skillet and pressed her fingers to Richard's neck. His pulse beat steady and strong beneath her touch. He was alive, but she knew what would happen when he woke. This time, he would kill her. She had seen it in his eyes before he fell, that murderous rage that alcohol always amplified. She ran to their bedroom and pulled out the small leather satchel she had hidden under a loose floorboard months ago, preparing for this very moment. Inside were the few precious items she had managed to save. Her mother's wedding ring, some money she had skimmed from the household accounts, a change of clothes, and an old photograph of her parents who had died 5 years prior. She changed quickly into her riding clothes, braided her long auburn hair, and grabbed her warmest cloak. The stable behind the house held Richard's prized mare, a beautiful chestnut named Clementine. Katherine had always been good with horses, one of the few skills her father had taught her before consumption took him. She saddled Clementine with practiced efficiency, her hands shaking but her movements sure. Within 15 minutes of striking Richard, Katherine was riding west into the darkness, leaving behind everything she had known. She rode through the night, pushing Clementine as hard as she dared. By dawn, they were miles from Denver, heading into the mountains. Katherine had no clear destination in mind, only a desperate need to put distance between herself and the man who would surely come looking for her. When morning light broke across the peaks, painting them gold and pink, Katherine allowed herself to hope that perhaps she might actually survive this. For 3 days, she traveled through rough terrain, avoiding main roads and towns where possible. She rationed the dried beef and bread she had grabbed from the pantry, drank from clear mountain streams, and slept in hidden groves when exhaustion overtook her. On the 4th day, weak from hunger and exposure, Katherine spotted smoke rising from a valley below. As she guided Clementine down the rocky path, Katherine saw a ranch spread out before her like a promise. Neat fences enclosed green pastures where cattle grazed. A sturdy 2-story house stood near a large barn, with several outbuildings dotting the property. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and honest living. Katherine's vision blurred as she approached. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and her body was giving out. The last thing she remembered was sliding from Clementine's saddle, the ground rushing up to meet her, and strong arms catching her before everything went black. When Katherine woke, she found herself in a clean bed in a room she didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. For a moment, panic seized her. Had Richard found her? Was she back in Denver? Easy now, a deep voice said from the doorway. You're safe here." Katherine turned to see a man in his late 20s watching her with concerned gray eyes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, but kind. He held his worn hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "My name is Ethan Keller," he said. "This is my ranch. You collapsed at my gate 3 days ago. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, has been tending to you. You were in pretty bad shape, exhausted and half-starved. There were also some old bruises." His eyes held a question he was too polite to ask directly. Katherine's hand instinctively went to her ribs, where Richard's kicks had left their mark 2 weeks ago. "I'm grateful for your kindness," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I should be going. I don't want to impose." "You're not fit to travel," Ethan said firmly. "And that mare of yours needs rest too. Fine animal like that doesn't deserve to be run into the ground." He paused. "I'm not going to ask questions you're not ready to answer, but you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I could use help around the place if you're able to work." Katherine studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. She had learned to be wary of men's kindness, but Ethan's gaze was direct and honest, and he kept a respectful distance from the bed. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't need to," Ethan said simply. "Someone's running from something bad enough to half kill themselves getting away from it. That's all I need to know. My mother raised me to help folks in trouble, and I aim to honor her memory by doing just that." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since leaving Denver. "I'm Katherine," she said, deciding in that moment not to give her married name. "Katherine Moore." Using her mother's maiden name felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. "Pleased to meet you, Katherine Moore," Ethan said with a gentle smile. "Now you rest up. Mrs. Chen will bring you some broth in a bit. Doctor from town checked you over yesterday and said you mainly needed food and rest. We'll talk more when you're feeling stronger." Over the following days, Katherine slowly regained her strength. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman in her 50s whose own story of survival in the West Katherine suspected was equally difficult, proved to be an excellent nurse and surprisingly good company. She spoke little but communicated much through her actions, always leaving Katherine's door open and making sure she felt safe. The ranch, Katherine learned, was called the Double K, named for Ethan's parents, Kenneth and Kathleen Keller, who had homesteaded the land 25 years earlier. Ethan had been born here, had grown up working this land, and had expanded the operation considerably after his father died 5 years ago. His mother had passed just 2 years later, leaving Ethan alone except for the handful of ranch hands he employed. When Katherine was finally strong enough to leave her room, she insisted on helping around the house. Mrs. Chen showed her the kitchen garden, the chicken coop, and the spring house where they kept milk and butter cool. Katherine threw herself into work, needing to feel useful and wanting to earn her keep. It was while gathering eggs one morning that she first really talked with Ethan beyond pleasantries. He was mending a fence near the henhouse, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat gleaming on his forearms despite the cool spring air. "Mrs. Chen says you're a hard worker," Ethan said, not looking up from hammering a post into place. "But you don't have to push yourself so hard. You're still recovering." "I need to earn my place here," Katherine replied, basket of eggs balanced on her hip. "You've been more than generous, but I won't be a burden." Ethan set down his hammer and turned to face her. "You're not a burden, Katherine, but I understand the need to feel useful. I was the same way after my mother died. Couldn't stand to be idle, had to keep moving or the grief would catch up with me." "I'm sorry about your mother," Katherine said. "Mrs. Chen told me she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Ethan agreed, his eyes distant with memory. She taught me that strength comes in many forms. It takes courage to build something, but it takes even more courage to start over when everything falls apart. I figure you've got that kind of courage in spades. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. You don't know what I left behind. Don't need to, Ethan said again, echoing his words from their first meeting. The past is yours to share or keep as you see fit. What matters is what you do from here on out. As weeks passed and spring deepened into early summer, Katherine found herself settling into life at the Double K Ranch. She worked alongside Mrs. Chen in the house and garden, helped with the chickens and the 2 milk cows, and even began riding out with Ethan occasionally to check on the cattle in the further pastures. Clementine had recovered well from their desperate flight and proved to be as fine a cow pony as she had been a carriage horse. During those long rides across Ethan's land, Katherine began to see a different kind of man than she had known before. Ethan was patient with his animals, treating them with respect and care. He spoke to his ranch hands as equals, asked their opinions, and paid them fairly. When one of the hands, a young Mexican man named Carlos, was injured roping a steer, Ethan personally rode to town to fetch the doctor and paid for the treatment himself. That's coming out of your wages, Katherine heard one of the other hands tease Carlos later. Like hell it is, Ethan said firmly. Man gets hurt working for me, I take care of him. That's how it works on the Double K. Katherine also noticed how Ethan treated her with unfailing respect. He never stood too close, never let his hands linger if he helped her down from her horse, never entered a room without announcing himself first. It was as though he understood, without being told, that she needed space and safety before anything else. One evening in late June, Katherine was sitting on the porch shelling peas for supper when Ethan rode in from town. His face was troubled, and he dismounted with less than his usual grace. "Everything all right?" Katherine asked, setting aside her bowl. Ethan glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was hanging laundry nearby, then back at Katherine. "Could we talk privately?" Katherine's heart began to race. Had Richard found her? Was she going to have to run again? She followed Ethan into the barn, her hands trembling. Inside, Ethan turned to face her, his hat in his hands again, that nervous gesture she had come to recognize. "I was in town picking up supplies," he said slowly. "The sheriff had some wanted posters up. New ones from Denver." Katherine's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed a stall door for support. "I see," she managed to say. "One of them was for a woman matching your description," Ethan continued. "Katherine Preston, wanted for attempted murder of her husband, Richard Preston." He paused. "That you?" There was no point in lying. Katherine nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I hit him with a skillet. He was going to kill me. He'd been beating me for years, and that night I couldn't take it anymore. I fought back." "Did he die?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Katherine whispered. "He was alive when I left, but the poster says attempted murder, so I suppose he must have survived." She finally looked up at Ethan, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I'll leave tonight. I won't bring trouble to your door." "You'll do no such thing," Ethan said firmly. He stepped closer, then seemed to think better of it and maintained his distance. "Katherine, listen to me. I don't give a damn what that poster says. A woman's got a right to defend herself. The law might not see it that way, but I do. But if they find me here, you could be charged with harboring a fugitive," Katherine protested. "I can't let you risk that." "My risk to take," Ethan said. "Now here's what we're going to do. We'll say you're my cousin from back east if anyone asks. Came out to help with the household after my mother passed. Some of the hands already think that anyway. Your husband's looking for Katherine Preston, but you're Katherine Moore now. We keep you away from town for a while, let things settle down." "Why are you doing this?" Katherine asked, the same question she had asked months ago but with new weight now. Why risk everything for me? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Because in the months you've been here, this place has come alive again. Mrs. Chen smiles now. The hands look forward to the meals you help prepare, and I. He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. I look forward to every conversation we have, every ride we take together. You've become important to me, Katherine, more important than I probably should admit. But even if you hadn't, I'd still help you. It's the right thing to do. Katherine's heart was pounding for an entirely different reason now. Ethan, I'm a married woman. Even if I never see Richard again, the law says I'm still his wife. Laws can be changed, Ethan said. In some territories, women can get divorced for cause, especially with proof of abuse. It's not easy, but it can be done. And even if it couldn't, I'd still want you here, Katherine, in whatever capacity you're comfortable with. As a friend, as a worker, as whatever you need to be. I just need you to know that you're safe here, and I'll protect you with everything I have. That night, Katherine lay awake in her bed, Ethan's words echoing in her mind. Somewhere along the way, between gathering eggs and learning to rope fence posts and riding across golden pastures, she had started to care for Ethan Keller. More than care, if she was honest with herself. She had started to love him, but love felt dangerous. Love was what had led her to Richard, or at least what she thought was love. She had confused charm with kindness, possessiveness with passion. How could she trust her own judgment again? Yet Ethan was nothing like Richard. Where Richard had isolated her from friends and family, Ethan encouraged her friendships with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands. Where Richard had controlled every aspect of her life, Ethan asked her opinion and respected her choices. Where Richard's touch had brought pain, Ethan barely touched her at all, respecting boundaries she hadn't even had to voice. The difference, Katherine realized, was that Ethan saw her as a person, not a possession. Summer rolled on, hot and golden. Katherine stayed close to the ranch, venturing no further than the near pastures. Ethan made trips to town alone now, always returning with news of the wider world. The wanted posters remained up, he reported, but interest seemed to be waning. A new silver strike near Leadville was occupying everyone's attention. One afternoon in August, a rider came up the road to the ranch house. Katherine was in the garden and saw him first, her blood running cold. The man was well dressed in a city suit, riding an expensive horse. He had the look of money and authority about him. She ran to find Ethan, who was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. "Someone's coming," she said breathlessly. "A city man." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Get in the house with Mrs. Chen. Stay away from the windows." Katherine did as he said, her heart hammering. From the kitchen, she and Mrs. Chen watched through a crack in the curtains as Ethan walked out to meet the visitor. The conversation was too distant to hear clearly, but Katherine could see Ethan's body language, tense and protective. The city man gestured broadly, clearly asking questions. Ethan shook his head repeatedly, his stance firm. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the man tipped his hat and rode away. Ethan waited until he was out of sight before coming inside. "Private detective," he said grimly. "Hired by your husband to find you. He's been checking ranches all through this area." "What did you tell him?" Katherine asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That I haven't seen anyone matching that description. That the only women on my property are my housekeeper and my cousin from Philadelphia. He asked to look around, but I told him no. This is private property, and he's got no legal right to search it without the sheriff, who would need a warrant." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "He didn't push it, but he'll likely be back. We need to be more careful." That night, Katherine couldn't eat. The thought of Richard out there searching for her, hiring men to track her down, made her stomach churn with fear. She excused herself early and went to her room, but sleep was impossible. A soft knock came at her door around midnight. "Katherine," Ethan's voice was quiet. "I saw your light still on. Can I come in?" "Yes," she said, sitting up in bed. Ethan entered but stayed near the door, proper as always. "Can't sleep." "Every time I close my eyes, I see Richard," Katherine admitted. "See him finding me, dragging me back, or worse, hurting you for helping me." "He'll have to go through me to get to you," Ethan said simply, "and I don't go down easy." "This isn't your fight," Katherine said, tears threatening again. "Yes, it is," Ethan replied. "Katherine, I need to tell you something, and I hope it won't scare you off, but I can't keep it in anymore." He took a deep breath. "I'm in love with you, have been for months now. I know the timing is terrible, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I need you to understand why I'm willing to fight for you. It's not just about doing the right thing anymore. It's about protecting the woman I love." Katherine stared at him, her heart racing. "Ethan, I'm still married." "I can't, I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything you can't give. I just needed you to know where I stand, that my protection isn't charity, it's love. And love doesn't come with conditions or expectations. You set the pace, Katherine. You decide what happens next. I'll be here, waiting for as long as it takes." After Ethan left, Katherine cried into her pillow, but they weren't entirely tears of fear anymore. Mixed in was hope, fragile and tentative, but real. Maybe, just maybe, she could have a second chance at life, at love, at everything Richard had stolen from her. The next morning, Katherine sought out Ethan in the barn. He was mucking out stalls, the work that never ended on a ranch. He looked up when she entered, hope and caution warring in his expression. "I need to tell you my whole story," Katherine said. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to fight this together, you deserve to know everything." They sat on hay bales, and Katherine told him. She told him about meeting Richard at a church social in Denver, how charming he'd been, how he'd courted her with flowers and pretty words. She told him about her parents' deaths, about being alone and vulnerable, about thinking Richard was her salvation. She told him about the wedding, the first blow, the years of fear and pain. She told him about that final night, the skillet, the blood, the desperate flight. Ethan listened without interruption, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he finally said. "And Katherine, I want you to know something. What happened to you wasn't your fault, none of it. Not the abuse, not fighting back, not running. You survived, and that took incredible strength." "I don't feel strong," Katherine admitted. "I feel broken." "You're not broken," Ethan said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." He hesitated, then asked, "Can I hold your hand?" It was such a simple request, so respectfully asked, that Katherine found herself nodding. Ethan's hand was calloused from work but gentle as it enfolded hers. They sat like that for a long while, connected by that simple touch, and Katherine felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. As autumn painted the aspens gold and set the mountainsides ablaze with color, Katherine and Ethan grew closer. It was a slow courtship, built on trust and respect. Ethan asked permission before every touch, every embrace. Their first kiss didn't come until late September, on a hilltop overlooking the ranch while they watched the sunset after checking on the cattle. "May I kiss you?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with longing but his eyes patient. "Yes," Katherine whispered, and when his lips met hers she felt something she'd never experienced before: desire without fear, passion without pain. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This tenderness, this joy. But their happiness was shadowed by the constant threat of discovery. The detective returned twice more, each time asking more questions, getting more persistent. Ethan held firm, never wavering in his story, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before the man's suspicions solidified into certainty. In late October, Ethan made a decision. "We need to go on the offensive," he told Katherine one evening after supper. "Sitting here waiting for them to find proof isn't working. We need to find a way to legally free you from that marriage." "How?" Katherine asked. "I'm wanted for attempted murder. No court is going to grant me a divorce." "Maybe not in Colorado," Ethan agreed, "but there are other territories. I've been doing some research. Wyoming Territory has more progressive laws about divorce, especially regarding abuse. If we can get evidence of what Richard did to you, medical records or witness testimony, we might have a chance." "I have no records," Katherine said. "Richard made sure I never saw doctors who might ask questions." "But you have scars," Ethan said gently. "A doctor could examine you, document them, and I'm willing to testify about the condition you were in when you arrived here." "That could make you an accessory," Katherine protested. "I don't care," Ethan said. "Katherine, I want a future with you. A real future where we don't have to hide or lie, where we can build a life together without looking over our shoulders. That's worth any risk." The plan they hatched was risky but simple. They would travel to Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, where Ethan knew a lawyer sympathetic to women's causes. Katherine would petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and abuse. If successful, the divorce would be legal in Wyoming and hopefully recognized in Colorado eventually. The journey would take several days each way, and they would have to be careful. They decided to travel as brother and sister, two siblings visiting family in Wyoming. Mrs. Chen would stay behind to manage the ranch with the hands. They left on a crisp November morning, the first snow of the season dusting the peaks above them. Katherine rode Clementine, and Ethan rode his sturdy gelding, Ranger. They packed light, carrying enough supplies for 2 weeks on the trail. The journey was long but not unpleasant. Away from the ranch and the constant fear of discovery, Katherine found herself relaxing slightly. They camped under the stars, Ethan always setting up 2 separate bedrolls a respectful distance apart. They talked for hours by the firelight, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. "What do you want, Katherine?" Ethan asked one night. "When all this is over, when you're free, what do you want your life to look like?" Katherine was quiet, thinking. "I want to wake up without fear," she finally said. "I want to feel safe. I want to laugh without wondering if I'm being too loud. I want—" She paused, then continued softly, "I want a family, children, a real home. All the things I thought I was getting when I married Richard, but real this time." "You can have all of that," Ethan said. "On the Double K or anywhere else you want. I'll build you a palace if that's what you desire, or a cabin in the mountains. Whatever makes you happy." "I just want you," Katherine said simply. "Everything else is just details." They reached Cheyenne after 5 days of travel. The town was bustling, full of ranchers and miners, cowboys and businessmen. They found a small hotel where they took separate rooms, maintaining their sibling charade. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Hartley, was one of the few female attorneys in the West. She listened to Katherine's story with professional detachment, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. "The case has merit," Margaret said when Katherine finished, "but there are complications. You're wanted for attempted murder. That will complicate things considerably." "What if the charges were dropped?" Ethan asked. "Then we'd have a much stronger case," Margaret admitted. "But that seems unlikely. The man is actively searching for her. He's not going to drop charges." "What if we could prove it was self-defense?" Katherine asked. "Would that help?" "It would," Margaret said. "But we'd need evidence. Witnesses, medical records, something concrete." They left Margaret's office discouraged but not defeated. As they walked back toward the hotel, Catherine's attention was caught by a woman across the street. She was well-dressed, perhaps in her 40s, with graying blonde hair. Something about her was familiar. "Mrs. Walcott," Katherine called out before she could stop herself. The woman turned and her eyes widened in recognition. "Katherine Moore, is that really you?" It was Emma Walcott, the wife of Richard's business partner. Katherine had known her back in Denver, and Emma had always been kind, though they'd never been close. "What are you doing in Cheyenne?" Emma asked, crossing the street to join them. Her eyes took in Katherine's appearance, then slid to Ethan with obvious curiosity. "Visiting family," Katherine said quickly. "This is my friend, Ethan Keller." Emma's expression suggested she didn't believe the cover story, but she was too polite to say so. "It's good to see you looking so well, my dear. We've all been so worried. Richard said you'd taken ill and gone to stay with relatives, but he seemed so distraught. And then those terrible rumors," she stopped abruptly. "What rumors?" Katherine asked. Emma glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private." They ended up in Katherine's hotel room. Emma perched on the edge of the bed while Katherine and Ethan took the two chairs. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," Emma began, "but my conscience won't let me keep silent anymore. Katherine, Richard has been telling everyone in Denver that you were mentally unstable, that you attacked him in a fit of madness. He has doctors prepared to testify to your fragile mental state." "That's a lie," Katherine said hotly. "He was the one who—" "I know," Emma interrupted quietly. "I've known for a long time what was happening in your house. I saw the bruises you tried to hide. I heard the way he spoke to you at social functions. I should have said something, done something, but I was a coward." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Katherine. You knew." Katherine felt a mix of anger and relief. "Why didn't you help me?" "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me," Emma said. "Richard is a respected businessman. You were his wife. The law gives him rights over you that no one would question. I told myself it wasn't my business, that perhaps I was mistaken." She wiped her eyes. "But I wasn't mistaken, was I?" "No," Katherine said softly. "You weren't." "Is that why you're here?" Emma asked, looking between Katherine and Ethan. "Are you seeking a divorce?" "How did you—" Katherine started. "There's only one reason a woman travels all the way to Wyoming Territory with a man who looks at her the way this one does," Emma said with a sad smile. "The divorce laws here are more favorable. My own sister did the same thing 10 years ago." Ethan spoke up for the first time. "Mrs. Walcott, would you be willing to testify about what you saw, the abuse, the bruises?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "If I do that, my husband's business partnership with Richard will be destroyed. We could lose everything." "I understand," Katherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I wouldn't ask you to risk that." "Let me finish," Emma said firmly. "I was going to say that losing a business partnership is a small price to pay for doing what's right. Yes, Mr. Keller, I'll testify. I'll tell the truth about what I witnessed. It's long past time someone stood up for Katherine." With Emma's testimony and a medical examination documenting Katherine's old injuries, Margaret Hartley felt confident about their chances. She filed the divorce petition, and a court date was set for early December. But news traveled fast, even in the West. 3 days before the hearing, Richard Preston arrived in Cheyenne. Katherine was walking back from the general store with Ethan when she saw him across the street. Her blood turned to ice, and she stopped dead, the package she was carrying tumbling from her nerveless fingers. Richard looked older, thinner. There was a scar on his temple where she'd struck him with the skillet. When his eyes met hers across the muddy street, they filled with a rage so pure and hot that Katherine took an involuntary step backward. Ethan was there instantly, positioning himself between Katherine and her husband. "Get to the hotel," he said quietly. "Now." But Richard was already crossing the street, his hand on the pistol at his hip. "That's my wife," he snarled. "Step aside, cowboy." "She's not property," Ethan said calmly, though Katherine could see the tension in his shoulders. "And she's not going anywhere with you." A crowd was gathering. Katherine saw the sheriff pushing through, a grizzled man with sharp eyes. "What's going on here?" the sheriff demanded. "This man is holding my wife against her will," Richard said, pointing at Ethan. "She's mentally unstable and needs to come home." "That's a lie," Katherine said, finding her voice. She stepped around Ethan, refusing to cower anymore. "Richard Preston beat me for 3 years. I defended myself and ran for my life. The only place I'm going with you is nowhere." "You little—" Richard started forward, but the sheriff's hand on his chest stopped him. "That's enough," the sheriff said. "I don't know what's going on between you two, but there'll be no violence in my town. You want to settle this, you do it legal-like in a courtroom." "She's wanted for attempted murder in Colorado," Richard spat. "Arrest her." The sheriff looked at Katherine with new interest. "That true?" "I hit him to stop him from killing me," Katherine said. "It was self-defense." "Self-defense," Richard laughed bitterly. "You tried to murder me in cold blood. You're insane, just like the doctors will testify." "What doctors?" Katherine demanded. "You never let me see doctors." "The ones who treated me after you attacked me," Richard said smoothly. "They observed your behavior over the years, through conversations with me. They'll testify you were showing signs of dangerous instability." "That's a lie," Emma Walcott's voice rang out. She emerged from the crowd, her husband beside her looking deeply uncomfortable. "I'll testify that this man abused his wife repeatedly. I saw the evidence with my own eyes." Richard's face went red. "You'll ruin your husband's business." "Then it will be ruined," Emma said firmly. "I should have spoken up years ago. I won't stay silent anymore." The sheriff looked between them all, clearly out of his depth. "This is a mess that's going to need sorting in court. Mr. Preston, you can file a complaint with the territorial court if you want." "Mrs. Preston, I'm Katherine Moore," Katherine said. "I'm petitioning for divorce on grounds of cruelty. The hearing is in 3 days." "Well then," the sheriff said, "sounds like the judge will sort all this out. In the meantime, I want both of you to stay away from each other. Mr. Preston, you find lodging on the west side of town. Miss Moore, you stay on the east side. Anyone causes trouble before the hearing, I'll lock them up." "Understood." Both Katherine and Richard nodded, though Richard's eyes promised violence. The next 3 days were the longest of Katherine's life. She barely slept, jumping at every sound. Ethan stayed close, taking the room next to hers and keeping his door open to listen for trouble. Margaret Hartley worked tirelessly, preparing their case, coaching Katherine on what to say in court. The day of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Katherine dressed in her best clothes, a simple gray dress that Emma had helped her purchase. She braided her hair severely, wanting to look respectable and calm, the opposite of the madwoman Richard claimed her to be. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread through Cheyenne, and it seemed half the town wanted to watch. Katherine saw Richard sitting with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Denver. She saw Emma Walcott with her husband. She saw the sheriff and various townspeople. And she saw Ethan, sitting in the front row, his eyes locked on her with such love and faith that she felt her courage strengthen. The judge was a stern-looking man in his 60s named Harold Winters. He called the court to order and asked Margaret Hartley to present her case. Margaret was brilliant. She walked the judge through Katherine's testimony, detailing the years of abuse with clinical precision. She called Emma Walcott to the stand, who testified through tears about the bruises she'd seen, the fear in Katherine's eyes, the way Richard had controlled every aspect of his wife's life. "I saw her once with a black eye," Emma testified. "When I asked about it, she said she'd walked into a door. But I saw the way she flinched when Richard approached. I saw the way she constantly tried to anticipate his needs, to keep him from getting angry. I knew what was happening and I did nothing. That's my shame to bear, but I'm speaking up now." Margaret then called the doctor who had examined Katherine. He testified about the old fractures, the scarring consistent with repeated beatings, the psychological trauma evident in her symptoms. Finally, Margaret called Ethan to the stand. He testified about the condition Katherine had been in when she arrived at his ranch, half-starved and terrified, covered in bruises. "Did you know she was a fugitive when you took her in?" Richard's lawyer asked during cross-examination. "Not at first," Ethan admitted. "But when I found out, it didn't change anything. A woman has a right to defend herself, even if it means attempted murder." "It wasn't attempted murder," Ethan said firmly. "It was survival." When it was Richard's turn to present his case, his lawyer tried to paint Katherine as mentally unstable. He called doctors who testified that Richard had described his wife's erratic behavior and mood swings. But under Margaret's cross-examination, it became clear that none of these doctors had ever actually examined Katherine. Their testimony was based entirely on Richard's word. Then Richard himself took the stand. He played the part of the grieving husband, testifying about how he'd loved Katherine, how he tried to help her with her condition, how devastated he was when she attacked him. "Did you ever strike your wife?" Margaret asked during cross-examination. "Never," Richard said firmly. "I loved her. I would never hurt her." "Then how do you explain the medical evidence of repeated trauma?" "She was clumsy," Richard said. "Always walking into things, falling. I tried to get her to be more careful. For 3 years, she was consistently clumsy enough to break ribs, fracture her arm, and sustain regular bruising." "She has always been fragile," Richard said. "Or you beat her," Margaret said flatly, "and you're lying now to cover your crimes." "Objection," Richard's lawyer called. "Sustained," the judge said. "Counselor, stick to questions." But the damage was done. Katherine could see doubt in the judge's eyes as he looked at Richard. The testimony concluded, and the judge called for a recess to consider his verdict. Katherine waited with Ethan and Margaret in a small room off the courthouse, her hands shaking. "Whatever happens," Ethan said, holding her hand, "we'll face it together." After 2 hours that felt like years, they were called back into the courtroom. The judge looked grave as he surveyed the packed room. "This is an ugly case," Judge Winters began. "It involves serious accusations on both sides. Mrs. Preston claims abuse and self-defense. Mr. Preston claims his wife is mentally unstable and violent. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in the middle." Katherine's heart sank. He wasn't going to rule in her favor. "However," the judge continued, "the evidence presented by Mrs. Preston is compelling and well documented. The evidence presented by Mr. Preston is largely hearsay and conjecture. Moreover, I find Mrs. Walcott's testimony particularly credible, as she has nothing to gain and much to lose by speaking out." Hope flickered in Katherine's chest. "It is the finding of this court that Mrs. Katherine Preston has suffered extreme cruelty at the hands of her husband, and that her actions on the night in question were taken in self-defense and fear for her life. Therefore, I am granting the petition for divorce. This marriage is dissolved as of this date." Katherine felt Ethan's arm around her as her knees buckled with relief. They'd done it. She was free. "Furthermore," the judge continued, I am recommending to my colleague in Denver that the attempted murder charges against Mrs. Preston be dropped, given the circumstances of self-defense. While I cannot compel a Colorado court to act, I will make my views known in the strongest possible terms. Richard shot to his feet. This is insane. She tried to kill me, Mr. Preston, the judge said coldly. You are fortunate that I am not charging you with perjury. Your testimony was contradicted by multiple credible witnesses and medical evidence. My advice to you is to leave this courtroom, leave Cheyenne, and thank whatever God you pray to that your former wife is not pressing charges against you for assault. Court dismissed. The gavel fell and Katherine burst into tears. Emma Walcott was there immediately, hugging her, crying with her. Ethan stood back, giving them space, but his eyes were bright with emotion. Outside the courthouse, Margaret Hartley shook Katherine's hand. You're free, she said with a smile. Legally and completely free. That divorce will be recognized in every territory and state. Thank you, Katherine said. I can never repay you. Seeing you walk out of here free is payment enough, Margaret said. Good luck, Katherine Moore. I have a feeling you're going to be just fine. They stayed in Cheyenne for another week while Margaret worked on getting the warrant from Colorado officially dismissed. It took some doing, but the judge's strongly worded letter carried weight, and the Denver prosecutor, faced with a losing case and bad publicity, agreed to drop the charges. Katherine was truly free. On the journey back to the Double K Ranch, everything felt different. The weight that had been pressing on Katherine's shoulders for years was gone. She could breathe deeply for the first time in what felt like forever. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked as they rode side by side through the snow-dusted landscape. The future, Katherine said. For so long I couldn't imagine one. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life running or that Richard would find me and kill me. But now. She looked at Ethan, this man who had protected her, fought for her, loved her without asking for anything in return. Now I can imagine all sorts of futures. What do they look like? Ethan asked softly. They all have you in them, Katherine admitted, if you'll have me. Ethan brought Ranger to a halt and dismounted. He helped Katherine down from Clementine, and in the middle of that snowy trail, he pulled a small box from his pocket. I bought this in Cheyenne, he said. I was waiting for the right moment, but I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect moment. There's just now. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. Katherine Moore, I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me? Katherine looked at the ring, at Ethan's hopeful face, at the vast open sky above them. She thought about all the miles she'd traveled, all the pain she'd endured, all the fear she'd overcome. And she thought about the man in front of her, who had shown her what real love looked like. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, deep and long and full of promise, while snow began to fall gently around them. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Chen decorated the house with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. The ranch hands served as witnesses. Emma Walcott and her husband made the journey from Denver, having reconciled with Ethan and Katherine's decision. A traveling minister performed the ceremony in front of the fireplace in the main room. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. She carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers. She wasn't nervous this time, not like she'd been at her first wedding. She knew exactly what she was doing and who she was marrying. When the minister asked Ethan if he took Katherine to be his wife, Ethan's voice was strong and sure. I do, and I promise to honor her, respect her, and love her every day of my life. When it was Katherine's turn, she looked into Ethan's gray eyes and said, I do, And I promise to build a life with you based on trust, respect, and love. You saved me, and now I choose you freely and completely." Their first kiss as husband and wife was sweet and full of hope. The small gathering cheered, and Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. Carlos played guitar while another ranch hand accompanied him on harmonica. They danced in the cleared living room, Katherine in Ethan's arms, finally allowing herself to feel safe and loved and cherished. That night, in the room they now shared, Ethan was patient and gentle. He asked permission for every touch, made sure Katherine was comfortable with every step. It was nothing like Katherine's first wedding night, which had been painful and frightening. This was tender and passionate and beautiful. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her skin. "My brave, beautiful wife." "I love you," Katherine replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The years that followed were good ones. Katherine flourished at the Double K Ranch, no longer just a guest or a worker but the lady of the house. She expanded Mrs. Chen's garden, started a small orchard, and began raising chickens for eggs to sell in town. She proved to have a good head for business, helping Ethan manage the ranch accounts and negotiate better prices for their cattle. In the summer of 1885, their first child was born, a healthy boy they named Thomas Kenneth Keller, after Ethan's father. Katherine was terrified during the pregnancy, worried that she would somehow fail as a mother because of everything she'd been through. But the moment they placed Thomas in her arms, all her fears melted away. This was her son, born of love, and she would protect him with everything she had. Ethan was a devoted father, walking the floor at night when Thomas cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rough cowboy voice. Watching him with their son, Katherine fell in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Rose Kathleen Keller, named for Ethan's mother. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's auburn hair. Thomas adored his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. The ranch prospered. Ethan's fair treatment of his workers and Katherine's business acumen created a reputation that spread throughout Colorado. The Double K became known as one of the best ranches to work for, and they never lacked for good hands. Emma Walcott became a regular visitor, her friendship with Katherine deepening over the years. Her husband's business had survived the break with Richard, who had returned to Denver but never recovered his reputation after the divorce trial. Katherine heard through Emma that Richard eventually moved east, remarried, and died of pneumonia in 1890. Katherine felt nothing when she heard the news, no relief or satisfaction or lingering anger. Richard Preston was part of her past, and her past no longer had power over her. In 1888, Colorado granted women the right to vote in school board elections, and Katherine was first in line to cast her ballot. She began working with other women in the area to advocate for more rights, for protections for women in abusive marriages, for changes to property laws. She used her own story, painful as it was to tell, to help others understand the importance of these protections. Margaret Hartley remained a friend and ally, and together, they helped several other women escape dangerous situations and obtain divorces. Katherine's home became a safe house of sorts, a place where frightened women could stay while they got back on their feet. Ethan supported this work completely, often riding out to pick up women from stagecoach stations or train depots, bringing them to the safety of the Double K. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Katherine with a trip to Denver. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and went to the theater. It was the first time Katherine had been back to the city since fleeing, and she was surprised to find that it held no terror for her now. She was a different person than the frightened girl who had run away in the night. She was Katherine Keller, rancher's wife, mother, advocate for women's rights, and survivor. On their last night in Denver, as they stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the gas-lit streets below, Ethan put his arms around Katherine from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked. Katherine thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the scared woman who had collapsed at Ethan's gate 12 years ago. She thought about everything that had happened since. The fear, the struggle, the triumph, the love, the family, the life they'd built together. "Not a single one," she said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "You saved my life, Ethan Keller." "No," Ethan said softly, touching her face with such tenderness. "You saved your own life. I just gave you a safe place to heal and grow into the incredible woman you were always meant to be." In 1893, their third child was born, another boy they named James. Katherine was 34 now, and Ethan was 37. Their children were growing up strong and happy on the ranch. Thomas, at 8, could already rope a calf and ride like he'd been born in the saddle. Rose, at 6, had her mother's way with the garden and her father's way with animals. Baby James was only a few months old but already showing a stubborn streak that made both his parents laugh. The Double K Ranch sprawled over 2,000 acres now, prosperous and well-run. Ethan had built Katherine the bigger kitchen she'd wanted, with a proper stove and lots of counter space for her baking. They'd added on to the house, giving each child their own room and creating a library where Katherine kept her growing collection of books. Mrs. Chen, now in her 60s, had officially retired but still lived in a cottage on the property and spent most days in Katherine's kitchen, teaching Rose to cook traditional Chinese dishes. The cultural exchange fascinated Katherine, and she carefully wrote down Mrs. Chen's recipes, wanting to preserve them. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle losses and money troubles. There were disagreements and difficult days. But Katherine and Ethan faced everything together, their partnership built on the solid foundation of respect, trust, and genuine love. On a warm spring evening in 1895, Katherine stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Thomas and Rose were playing in the yard with their new puppy. James was asleep in his crib inside. Ethan came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist in his favorite embrace. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," Katherine said, and meant it. She thought about that desperate flight 15 years ago, about the fear and pain that had driven her into the mountains. She thought about the moment she collapsed at Ethan's gate, certain she was going to die. She hadn't died. She had lived, truly lived in ways she never imagined possible. "Thank you," she said to Ethan, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for protecting me when I was vulnerable, for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself." "Thank you," Ethan replied, "for trusting me, for building this life with me, for teaching me that love isn't about possession or control but about freedom and partnership." They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. This was home. This was family. This was love. Katherine had run away from death and found life. She had fled from cruelty and found kindness. She had escaped from a man who claimed to love her but hurt her, and she had found a man who loved her by honoring her humanity and supporting her strength. The wild mountains of Colorado had given her sanctuary. The Double K Ranch had given her purpose. But Ethan Keller had given her something even more precious. He had given her back herself. And in return, she had given him her heart, freely chosen and freely given, with no fear and no regret. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine leaned back against her husband's chest and smiled. The past was behind her, buried and powerless. The The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. She was Katherine Keller, survivor and thriver, wife and mother, advocate and friend. She was loved and loving. She was safe. She was home, and she was free.